Welcome into Horns 24/7 special commitment reaction podcast. I am Taylor Estes, and I'm joined by Horns 24/7 recruiting analyst Hudson Standish. And Hudson, it's been quite a whirlwind week for the Longhorns. It's basically Arch Madness on steroids, honestly. But before we get into all of this, how are you holding up covering this all going down right now?
It's been fun, Taylor. I know that when I took the job with 247, the number one tip I got from fans was, look, when Mike Roach takes a vacation, you better be prepared for all these commitment stories. And they weren't lying. Mike's been on vacation. We've already had 4 in one day with a little bit of a tease, probably a couple more, if not more than 2 to follow shortly. So it's been an absolute whirlwind for Texas fans. And hey, Steve Sarkisian, Brendan Marion, and Kyle Flood had a hell of a day.
They did, yeah, coming out of this official visit weekend, which was the second big official visit weekend, back-to-back weekends, I would say, for Texas. I feel like, some of this probably got a little overlooked because of Arch Manning taking his official visit the week prior. All eyes were on that. And then, but still, Texas had some really priority type of targets that were on campus this weekend for official visits. And as Hudson mentioned, Texas on as of the time we are recording this, I'm just going to say that because let me tell you, we were going to start recording this more than an hour ago, almost 2 hours ago now, and literally every single time we started queuing things up to get going, there was another commitment. But as of 5:55 p.m. on Sunday, Texas has added 4 commitments in one single day. Hudson, this is one of the first times I would say in my career that I have seen this number or this level and a number of commitments in a single day aside from National Signing Day. I mean, this is totally out of the ordinary, especially for Texas.
Yeah, absolutely, Taylor. You mentioned the Arch Madness note off the top. Mike and I kind of immediately reported as soon as Arch Manning made his commitment to the Texas Longhorns last Thursday that, look, this tidal wave of recruiting momentum that we've talked about since we've been, even discussing Arch Manning as a recruit, the early phone calls and messages we were getting from sources around the country was that the actual proof of concept of that recruiting momentum was going to supersede the hype, which felt almost insane to say. But after Texas did this on this recruiting weekend, I mean, you kind of can't argue with it. Also,
Yeah.
it can't be stated enough that the timeline of how all of this went down just went perfectly, because you were absolutely right. This recruiting weekend did kind of get overshadowed by the fact that Arch Manning was on campus this past weekend. There was a lot of rumors about a decision. Him getting it out of the way on Thursday so that the visitors on campus could have 3 days to kind of bask in the hype a little bit and still have their own process and it not be as much about Arch as it is, their own recruitments was really big. And I mean, you're talking about a weekend that featured guys like 5-star Anthony Hill, 5-star Jonte Cook. Like, there are so many big-time targets that are still uncommitted that Texas had on this recruiting weekend. I mean, it truly is all gas, no brakes right now on the 40 acres.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And let's get into that. So, we kind of teased it. You probably know, if you're a Horns 24/7 member, all of the madness. If you get our text alerts, I apologize in advance for just sending so many today. That's just doesn't happen. So, yes, I flooded your inbox, your text inbox with alerts today, but they were good alerts. Texas landed 4 commitments. And let's start with, we'll go in order from ranking, Hudson. So let's start with, as of right now, the most recent commitment that Texas landed, which was top 247 priority offensive line target, 4-star Harker Heights offensive lineman Jayden Chapman. This is, if you're over at Horns 24/7, Hudson and Mike have continued to say that Chapman was one of the top priority targets on Kyle Flood's, list for the 2023 cycle. Hudson, how big of an addition is this for Texas to land their number 1 priority offensive lineman, not just for the 2023 cycle, but honestly in back-to-back cycles now with Texas, signing some of their priorities in 2022 as well?
That's a really good point, Taylor. It's back-to-back cycles where, even if you consider Kelvin Banks and Devon Campbell kind of a tied for the top of the priority in the 2022 cycle, it's back-to-back years where Kyle Flood identified somebody, put him at the top of his board, and made sure to get him. it can't be stated enough how big of a recruiting win this is. And honestly, I'd kind of say that when you look at the schools that were pursuing, sorry, I still have my notifications on in case a commitment happens, and I just got a little bit of a scare with a kid that
You're perfectly good. That's why I'm wearing my Apple Watch. I literally am wearing my Apple Watch only for this reason.
exactly. But the point being, even if you look at his ranking, which is a really high ranking on 247 and the composite, the schools that are pursuing him with committable offers in Oklahoma, Texas A&M, LSU, Alabama, like those are some of the biggest programs in the country. So not only getting a guy that's this highly ranked, but against those schools to where those are the true blue blood battles on the recruiting trail. I've really liked Jayden Chapman. I went out and saw him in Killeen last year, the week after that Kyle Flood became the first college coach to extend him an offer. And Chapman told me then Texas is always going to be at the top, if not in the mix with me, because when a lot of other college coaches were telling me that they needed to see more film or that they wanted to get me on campus a couple more times before offering, Flood at the University of Texas was the first one to pull the trigger on an offer. And that rewarded itself today. I mean, it kind of can't be stated enough how big this is to get Chapman in the boat with two other offensive linemen that we'll talk about later also joining him.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, I feel like Kyle Flood has really just knocked it out of the park in a absolutely dire necessary way too, because Texas has really struggled with offensive line recruiting. Obviously, the NFL draft shows that. Only having two offensive linemen drafted since 2008, and both of those were really the diamond in the rough, low 3 stars that didn't have hardly any offers. I mean, this is a big deal for the future of Texas. And it's much needed too, Hudson, when you think of, the type of quarterback room that Steve Sarkisian is trying to build here. You can have the best quarterback in the world, but if you have no roadblocks in front of him, and in fact, if the people in front of them are more of a roadblock to him than the other team, then you're in trouble. And, that's kind of where Texas has been for probably a decade now, honestly. Even when Colt McCoy was on campus, their offensive line in 2009 was awful. Colt McCoy just hit it because he was so elite and, such a special player. So this is a big addition. What does he bring to the table, in your opinion?
So he has that positional versatility to where he can play as a tackle because of his supreme movement ability and arm length, or because of those factors, he can be a truly impactful guard, interior offensive lineman in the run game. Taylor, I think that he is one of the few guys in the state of Texas for the 2023 class, including Ian Reed and Harris Sewell, who aren't going to end up at Texas, that could be potentially day one or after a redshirt freshman year, true plus contributors in the run game. Now, Jayden's going to have to work a little bit on his pass sets, but when we have evaluated him against good competition, I saw him last year against DeSoto in the playoffs, hardcore recruiting fans should know that DeSoto is always loaded with edge talent. Or at Under Armour Dallas in a camp setting, he's looked great in those environments too. I think that this was the guy, after missing out on Ian Reed and Harris Sewell, that Texas had to make sure they got in the class. And honestly, Taylor, this is a guy that even though last year's offensive line class was loaded with targets that are going to, probably end up having a little bit of a leg up, this is a guy that I don't think is just a pure high ceiling take. I think he could compete for a spot within the next couple of years at the University of Texas.
Yeah, this is a big target. Again, top 24/7 prospect. He is the number 9 ranked interior offensive lineman in the 2023 recruiting cycle. When you look at his skill set, obviously we have him listed as an interior offensive lineman. Is that what position on the offensive line do you think he best fits when he moves to the college level?
I think for Texas, he'll probably start at right tackle, and if they don't feel like he can hang out at tackle, they can move him inside. He truly is a versatile guy, though, because it sounds crazy, but he's only 6'4", But
Only.
in the offensive line world, he does have the arm length and the wingspan to kind of negate some of those concerns for a guy that prioritizes big bodies as much as Kyle Flood does. I mean, again, it sounds crazy to even say the only 6'4" thing, but when the other two offensive line commits on the day, and Andre Cojoe and Connor Stroh, are true 6'6" plus, it kind of adds a little bit to that.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Let's before we move on, anything else you want to tackle? We have a number of commits to get through, so we're going to try to go boom, boom, boom. But anything else that you think is relevant for Texas fans to know about Jayden Chapman?
I don't think so. Let's go to the next one.
All right. So another 4-star that Texas landed on Sunday is 4-star Duquesne wide receiver Jonah Wilson. He again was another visitor, I believe, over the weekend, and one of the 4 commitments, one of the 5 of the weekend too. We'll get to the one that went down on Saturday too. But what do you like in Jonah Wilson?
So when Brennan Marion took the wide receiver job at Texas, one thing that he kind of wanted to put his stamp on in the program was, while Steve Sarkisian and company kind of just wanted a more fluid wide receiver room devoid of true position labels, Marion said, okay, that makes sense, but I'd want one true X receiver, somebody who can go up and win contested catches, somebody with a big frame that can kind of impose his physicality on a group of defensive backs. And that's exactly what Jonah Wilson is. I mean, the Texas staff there, they offered him a little later than most schools. I mean, if you want to put it into perspective, Wilson had an Ohio State offer before he had an in-state offer from Texas, but they were still able to use Brennan Marion's addition to kind of cross the finish line. Texas offered him after a basketball game where apparently he went crazy and was just showing off his supreme athleticism. And that's kind of what you get with Jonah Wilson. He hasn't been able to fully develop as a wide receiver because at Spring Duquesne High School, they kind of have to play him at quarterback at times. He's a little bit of a do-it-all athlete. So if you see his stats and maybe not matching up with what a true 4-star receiver should bring, that's a little bit of context there. He did have one of the best games I've seen from a high school receiver, though, his sophomore year in the playoffs against a Bridgeland team with former 5-star quarterback Connor Wigman, who ended up at A&M, where I believe he ended up with over 200 yards and 3 touchdowns, and kind of, I mean, was one of the true only reasons why Duquesne was able to pull an upset over a state top 10 ranked team.
Yeah, I mean, this is a big when you look at this receiver room too that Brennan Marion is trying to build, and obviously Steve Sarkisian and the offensive staff. I mean, you can't have too many weapons, I feel like, especially with the way that Texas is recruiting. Now, I feel like Texas did have a little bit too many skill players under Tom Herman's staff and not enough big guys, but you can tell that that is not the direction that this coaching staff is going. They prioritize the big guys on both sides of the ball, but when you are recruiting this elite level of quarterbacks, you need to make sure that they have guys to go to. And Jonah Wilson, I think, is one of them. When you look at what Brennan Marion has been doing since he's arrived, I mean, he was hired after Tashard Choice, right? I'm trying to remember the time. It was one or the. I mean, it was close enough. It doesn't probably really matter, honestly.
I believe he was after Choice, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of thinking. So, one of the last additions to Steve Sarkisian's staff. How would you rate what Brennan Marion has been able to do in such a short period of time at Texas?
I mean, it's amazing. It's exactly what Texas needed, in the wide receiver spot. I think that one of the things I've been the most impressed of with Steve Sarkisian is, after identifying a weakness within the program or the coaching staff or whatever it may be, he doesn't hesitate to immediately fix it with the traits that the traits that were needed. And what Texas really needed to add in the coaching staff was young, relatable, hungry volume recruiters. And that's what that's exactly what they did with Brennan Marion and Tashard Choice. I mean, Marion grabbed Ryan Niblett, who's a top 55 player in the country, got his friend in Jonah Wilson. And honestly, Taylor, I don't think he's done. I could definitely see Texas adding another receiver in the next, week or so, if not sooner.
If not by the time we finish recording this, maybe potentially. Just kidding, kind of. But no, I mean, for sure. I think this is a really big deal of what Brendan Marion has been able to do. Before we get to the other commitments, don't worry, we're not done. We have plenty more to talk about. We're going to take a really quick break, but stick around because we will continue the Arch Madness on steroids reaction to what has led to a very successful recruiting weekend for Texas this week. So stay tuned. We will be right back. And if you're watching us on the Horns 24/7 YouTube channel, we will roll on here. All right, Hudson, we've got 2 down. We've got more to go. So this one came down actually on Saturday with Texas landing 4-star Hawaii linebacker Leona Lefau, I think. I hope I'm not
Leona
butchering that
Lefau.
name. Yeah, he's the number 29 overall prospect in the or linebacker prospect, excuse me, in the 2023 recruiting class, number 1 prospect in Hawaii. If you were reading Horns 24/7 over the weekend, you will see plenty of content about what this addition means, not just for the linebacker position, but also the fact that Texas has really been able to kind of sneak their way into Hawaii. A place that's very much a West Coast school type of recruiting ground for the most part. What would be your assessment of, the Longhorns being able to get a Hawaii prospect like Leona Lefau?
It's major, and it's a credit to Jeff Choate. And also, Taylor, like, if you have been reading Horns 24/7, while we weren't super overt in saying it, we had been steadily saying that Texas had a really good shot to land Leona Lefau for a while. It was one of those ones where we kind of had a little bit of an exclusive on it, got quotes, and after talking with him and kind of the circle, decided not to put in picks in to tip off anybody else, whether it be other schools or other sites. And, we had 3 articles ready to go and had kind of been saying it for a while, but this is just an absolutely massive development. I mean, this is a top 200 guy, according to 247's own rankings. And it's somebody that can immediately be a difference maker at that Mike spot. He is a little bit undersized right now, but when you're looking at the instincts, the ability to cover in the passing game, and just his nose for the ball and form tackling, like, he is the exact type of linebacker that Texas really needed to land that complements North Crowley, Samaje Burrell, and potential 2 true elite type guys in Anthony Hill and Darian Gillette that they're still pursuing. Just an absolute home run job by Jeff Choate, Jake Lange, Pete Kwiatkowski, and the rest of that staff. Like, the Arch Madness dominoes aren't only on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is good players want to play with good players, whether they're on the same side of the ball, same position, it doesn't matter. I mean, that is why I think the Arch Manning commitment is so crucial in so many ways, especially if, you want to play with the best player in your recruiting class. Oh, and he just so happens to be one of the only players that touches the ball on every single, offensive possession. I mean, you want to play for those type of guys. That's how that was. You go back to 2002 recruiting class with Vince Young and stuff. People wanted to play with Vince. It wasn't just guys on offense that committed after he did. I mean, the dominoes that fall really can be program changing when you get these type of guys, these type of legacy guys, like the Arch Manning. You mentioned Jake Lange. He and overall, I'll just say, Jake Lange has some Polynesian ties. And then if you look at Pete Kwiatkowski and Jeff Choate, they have, an extended history in recruiting the West, on the West Coast when they coach for different West Coast type of teams. Is that how big were those relationships, both like Choate and Kwiatkowski, prior to coming to Texas, with them just kind of being familiar with that type of recruiting ground? And then how big was it for, support staff for Jake Lange to kind of play a role in this one?
Yeah, it was definitely big. I mean, with Pete Kwiatkowski and Jeff Choate, the familiarity with kind of knowing how to pitch those guys, I think definitely matters. And with Jake Lange, I mean, the thing is with Jake, like, Jake has just been big on so many recruitments, whether it's like Alfred Collins or, Junior Angelau. Like, Jake is just one of the support staffers that we constantly hear a lot of praise for. So that's big. But, when talking with Leona, the main thing is just that, hey, Jeff Choate's the guy I have the best relationship with. Texas crushed the visit. And I feel a lot of security in the fact that he's going to be there being my coach. So Texas did have a very well-rounded pitch, and everybody kind of played a part. But I don't think without Jeff, I think if Jeff Choate wasn't on staff, he'd probably end up at Oregon.
I got you. Good stuff there. And I'm going to just designate myself if there is any, time that we need to go to Hawaii to watch him play in person. I know I don't cover recruiting very often, but I'll take one for the team if you guys don't want to make that trip. So,
Listen, I
big,
already have the sunburn to go to Hawaii. I'll fit
yeah,
in a little bit better.
yeah, you're getting your base tan, right? To
Exactly.
go over there and cover Leona Lefau. Yeah, another big addition. So we'll shift focus back to the Sunday guys since we're going in order of rankings, and another commitment that Texas landed on Sunday. Technically, I think I can't even think straight right
This was
now.
number
I think it
one.
was the first one, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
it
He
went
and,
like
he
one.
and Jonah Wilson were within minutes of each other.
Yeah,
So, maybe that's not technically correct because, with also it's who posts first on Twitter, who posts first on Instagram, but they're around the same time. And I think Stroh edged them.
yeah. I was gonna say I know I tweeted the Stroh commitment first, so we'll go with that one. But yeah, so Frisco Wakeland 3-star offensive lineman Connor Stroh committed to Texas, kind of getting the ball rolling for the Longhorns. Whether you want to say that or not on Sunday, but this is another offensive lineman, Hudson, that Kyle Flood was early to offer. And how big of a role did that play in being able to land this offensive lineman?
Yeah, Taylor. I mean, I think that Connor mentioned it in his article where we got quotes from him as well. Like, I think he straight up said it gave me a lot of confidence in Kyle Flood because this is an offensive line coach who kind of can evaluate and spot talent himself instead of just looking at, okay, how many offers does this guy have? I guess I'll watch the tape now and find out. And this is a theme for all of them. I believe Texas was also first with Andre Cojoe. So for all three that committed today, Kyle Flood still was the first one to offer. And it kind of can't say enough. And I think another thing that's worth mentioning is it's one thing to offer first if you are in FCS school or a kind of lower tier G5 school. Like it means a lot for sure. But it's another thing when you're at the University of Texas and you can have a little bit of a pick of the litter and you still are the first to really co-sign, I think this player is good enough to play at this school.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of times, because you're right, sometimes you'll see offers from some smaller schools, even maybe some like, group of 5 type of programs that are Division 1, but still just not the Power 5 schools. But a lot of times when a school like Texas or a school of that type of magnitude offers, it almost has a chain reaction for the other schools that kind of, jump in the mix here. So it even adds a little bit more competition to the recruiting front, even if they're the first to offer, just because, I mean, if you look at, for instance, I'm looking at Connor Stroh's profile right now. Texas offers him first one to offer, and then it was Florida State offers, then Baylor offers, then Indiana offers, and it's almost like a domino effect a little bit. And I feel like if you're a Texas fan right now, you have to be jumping for joy that Kyle Flood is not only landing these guys, but he is taking an initiative to be among the first to offer offensive linemen that he feel are, could really be difference maker for the program. Because let's be honest, it hasn't been that way for years, right?
Yeah, absolutely, Taylor. Another thing worth mentioning too with Stroh is this is another prospect that was kind of recruited at a higher level by schools than what his rating would indicate. I mean, there's been a little bit of debate and maybe a little bit of revisionist history on whether Texas A&M's offer was committable for him. We've heard that it is from a source or two, and then another source or two has kind of debated it. But even if you don't mention A&M, you're talking about Auburn and a couple other schools that are like big time Power 5 programs. So even though Stroh is a 3-star prospect, like he still was being heavily recruited by a number of big time Power 5 schools.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned that Auburn, A&M, Arkansas was another one listed that was
Arkansas.
heavily going. Yeah, Baylor, playing for Dave Aranda, the defending Big 12 champions. That actually pulls a lot of weight right now too. Um, Hudson, we at Horns or at 24/7 Sports have him listed as a tackle. Is that where you see him projecting at the college level, or do you see him being somewhere else?
So I think that Stroh probably will start in a similar spot to Jayden Chapman, to where he can play either tackle spot, but they might even move him to guard, just depending on how he kind of looks when he's on campus. The only of the three that I think is a for sure tackle, and I believe he might even be listed as an interior offensive lineman, is Andre Cojoe, who is 6'6" and has a 84.5-inch wingspan according to Texas. So I think that Stroh has some positional versatility. He might not move well enough to stick at tackle long term. So I think guard probably will end up where he slots in. But then again, Taylor, a lot of people had similar concerns about Hayden Connor out of high school, and that's probably going to be Texas's starting left tackle come the fall.
Yeah, yeah, good stuff there. All right, so we'll round it out here with the fourth commitment. Actually, this one's in order, isn't it? Cojoe was the last. No, Chapman was the last
Cojoe
one.
was
Never
third.
mind. Yeah, Chapman was the one right before we were about to start this. It was like, oh wait, not yet. But so Texas did land another offense. Big day for Kyle Flood. First, let's give credit where credit is due to land three quality targets, priority targets too, on the offensive line, a position that has been a Achilles heel, probably is the best way to describe it for Texas over the last decade. But Texas did also add the addition of a three-star offensive lineman, Andre Cojoe. He was the third to commit to Texas on Sunday. What do you like when you look at Andre Cojoe?
So the big thing, Taylor, and I mentioned this in a tweet, and I think a couple people who maybe don't pay as close of attention to recruiting but are still in the Texas Twitter sphere kind of were stunned by this. But the number one thing that impresses me is this is a kid that is going to early enroll, so he'll come in to Texas if he, ends up sticking with his commitment. He'll come to Texas and enroll as a 16-year-old. Like this,
Wow.
yeah. So he is a 16-year-old who is going to eventually turn 17, I believe, during late January, and will complete a full year of strength and conditioning at the college level to reshape his body before he even turns 18. Now, 18 through 19 are the biggest kind of physical development, is the biggest physical development window for an athlete when you're talking about football. So Andre is going to have basically 2 full years before he even truly reaches his ceiling. And that's going to be with a collegiate nutrition plan and all of the amenities that the University of Texas provides. So that's the first thing that I always want to tell people about Andre Cojoe. Yeah, he's not super highly ranked right now, but because he's going up against all these other guys from across the country who are 17 and 18, and he was playing all of his junior year of football as a 15-year-old. Now, the physical tools are insane. Like I said, he's 6'6", if not 6'6.5". Texas has him at an 84.5-inch wingspan, and he truly does move pretty well for a guy his size, especially just kind of a baby on the football field. He works with a trainer in Zach Collins that Mike and I work with a lot, and I've seen those sessions. He's going to continue to improve his technique, and I truly believe that by the time he gets on campus, he'll have a little bit of a higher floor, but the ceiling is what's truly intriguing about that. And Taylor, honestly, with the prospects that Texas signed last year and Jayden Chapman in the mix, they need one of these longer curve developments because Andre Cojoe knows that he needs this time to improve. And by year 3, if everybody else is, hopefully for Texas fans in the NFL, he can then slot in and not have to worry about playing before he's ready.
Yeah, and especially on the offensive line, that is so huge. I mean, as we're talking about these young offensive linemen, the ideal situation for Kyle Flood is not to be in this situation where he may have to rely on young bodies. It just goes to show how many misses I would say in recruiting and lack of development at the offensive line that Texas has had for several years. It's led to this. So, I think it's safe to say that when we're talking about young guys starting on the offensive line, we're not saying they're advocating for it. It's more of this is probably the reality that Texas is in. It's not the best reality that any coach in college football would want to be in to start, rely on true freshman offensive linemen. But that is the case for Texas. So it makes it even more important for them to get, guys they feel that can be, early impact type of players. Talking about Andre Cojoe, when you mentioned his age, it kind of reminded me a little bit about Moro Ojomo. He was
Yeah,
really,
absolutely.
yeah, like when you said that's the first I'd heard of it, and that was my first thing that came to my mind. And Moro Ojomo has really kind of come on. It took him a little bit of time. He enrolled, I think he was 17 his whole first year at Texas. So his sophomore year, he was 18 years old. Just kind of, as you mentioned, just a little bit but like physically wise, a little bit underdeveloped just because of their age. It's worked out decently well, I would say, for Moro Jomo. They're kind of in a similar, he was a 3-star coming into Texas too. I think if you're a Texas fan, you hope that the trajectory kind of plays along those same lines, right?
Yeah, and another thing too, Taylor, like we are viewing Moro Ojoma through the lens of like, okay, this is what he's shown so far. We will probably view Andre Cojoe through the lens of we're not even going to have to see him on the field until year 3 or year 4. Where again, because of necessity, Moro has had to kind of factor into that defensive line rotation while he can't even legally drink. So
Right.
that's just kind of how that one shakes out. And I guess the last thing to mention is with these 3 offensive linemen committed on the day, it just really does reinforce the half joke, half serious point that Mike and I make all the time. If you were a big body at offensive line, Kyle Flood's going to find you and he's going to recruit you. And there is a little bit of that kind of runs counterintuitive to a way that a lot of the recruiting services like to evaluate, because the longer and leaner guys normally do get the preference. But when you're talking from a true collegiate lens, there is something to be said about just having that physical nature. And, again, it kind of dumbs it down, but it's easier to move people when you're bigger. Like that's part of football at the end of the day. And I don't know, the strategy seems to be working. I saw an interesting tweet from one of my friends on the timeline who I am unfortunately forgetting which one of you posted it. So again, apologies, but I think it just kind of underscores the different priorities for the 2 previous regimes, and that Steve Sarkisian had 12 offensive line commits in 4 years. Kyle Flood and Steve Sarkisian have 10 and 2.
Yeah.
And that's just right now. By the time we are finished recording, it could be 11. Like,
Yeah.
that's just kind of how it goes.
Yeah, and that's needed. Both Steve Sarkisian, Kyle Flood, Jeff Banks, a lot of the coaches that are on the staff have coached in the SEC. That is where Texas is going to be moved, regardless when it happens, maybe 2024, 2025, whatever it may be. But they know what they need to be competitive in the SEC, and it is different. When you look at the rosters of the Big 12 compared to SEC rosters, when you look at the big guys, the guys in the trenches, it's almost astounding at how many more big guys SEC teams have than Big 12 rosters. And it's a necessity, and these coaches understand it. And it's got to be a breath of fresh air for Texas fans. I feel that they are really, honing in on making sure they have those big bodies on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, absolutely, Taylor. And I think I mentioned it in the spring as well, or not in the spring, but pretty recently. We had heard and then eventually saw with our own eyes that Cam Williams, the big offensive tackle from Duncanville, had reshaped his body, was still the big mammoth that he kind of is, but had turned it into productive weight and still is moving as good as anybody else on the team in his position. So again, this strategy, while it might not yield a ton of true like 4-star blue chip guys, like Kyle Flood has had Andre Cojoe and Connor Stroh as 2 of his biggest priorities in the class since last fall. Like this isn't we signed this many kids in 2022, so now in 2023 we need to have some lower ranked guys. No, this is who he prioritized, and they nailed it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Before we wrap up here, Hudson, I feel like it's safe. I'm going to give a teaser. I'm not going to tell any detail, but if I were to give the listeners right now and the viewers right now a glimpse at what our article admin of unpublished commitment stories looks like, I'm just going to tell y'all It's not just the, "Oh, we'll just have this as a shot in the dark" type of commitment story. These are legit ones, and it is, it's lengthy. I'll say that. So with that said, Hudson, what would who are some of the guys that you would say Texas fans need to keep an eye on who could be the next in line to pull the trigger and commit to Texas?
Taylor, I made the joke earlier on the board, and this was before any of the four commitments. So you can truly think, and we had all those stories prepped, including some supplementary on all of them. So you can truly just imagine. But somebody asked me, "Hey Hudson, like how many articles do you have ready for guys that are, you know, not committed yet?" That you're, and I just said, even if you set an over under, even if you took a guess, it would be more than that, and you wouldn't believe me if I told you. So, I mean, it's still a crazy amount. One name I'd keep an eye on: five-star wide receiver Jonte Cook. Mike and I both have crystal ball predictions, and Steve Wiltfong does as well. That is a major piece that Texas has had at the top of their board for ages, and they truly are kind of in the driver's seat right now. So we'll see where that one goes. You kind of never know in recruiting, but that's one that I'd keep an eye on.
Yeah, Jonte Cook, he recently released his top 3 schools of Oregon, Michigan, and Texas. Took a visit over the weekend, so, one to watch. Anyone else that you, feel confident in naming right now?
There are a couple, but I'll definitely be the party pooper and just let everybody's imaginations run wild.
We'll save it for the VIP subscribers over at Horns 24/7, which is why you should be a VIP member of Horns 24/7 right now, especially. This is only beginning for Texas with the 2023 recruiting cycle. A lot, obviously, it started with Arch Manning, and there are plenty of dominoes that will continue to fall. And I feel confident saying will, not. I'm not even going to say could.
Oh,
I'm going to say
definitely.
will. Yeah, will continue to fall. So you'll want to make sure to, if you're not a member, go sign up to Horns 24/7, get your annual membership, 30% off your first year. You get access to all of our content plus all of the VIP content across the 24/7 Sports Network. So if you really want to go, talk trash to some Sooners or Aggies, or, just kind of enjoy their dismay with Texas rolling and recruiting, that's why you do an annual membership. So Hudson, I think we'll wrap it at that. I appreciate you joining me today, and for all the work that you and Mike are putting in. I hope that our listeners understand the amount of time and effort that these guys work around the clock to make sure that they are providing our Horns 24/7 members with the best overall recruiting coverage that's in the industry. Honestly, I feel comfortable. I've worked in this industry for too long. I'm not going to admit how long, but these are the best of the best. So keep it locked on Horns 24/7 for all of the latest recruiting and team coverage in what's expected to be a summer to remember for the Longhorns. But for Hudson Standish, I am Taylor Estes. Thanks for tuning in.